Testing. Okay. All right, everyone, for those of you that are joining us for the Adult Faith Formation, I invite you all to come on forward and have a seat, please. We're going to get started fairly shortly here, so if you're going to be joining us for the Adult Faith Formation, please come up and have a seat. I might bring my microphone out there. This is going to work out here. For those of you that are joining the Adult Faith Formation, we're going to go ahead and get started. So please come inside and have a seat if you're going to be joining us. It doesn't work out here.
Parenthood's talking. Time to go in.
Apparently my microphone doesn't transfer out there. It was probably very loud in here, though. Sorry, guys. I was trying to yell out there too, because I was like, well, they're not hearing me. All right. Well, I think for the sake of time, let's just go ahead and get started. So thank you for those of you that are joining us today. We have Vicki Van De Creek with us today from Planned Parenthood. So she's going to tell us a little bit about who they are, what they do, and a little bit more. So we'll hand it over to you, Vicki.
Cool. Thank you. Do we need the mic? Yes. Yeah? Okay. Cool. Well, thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time and perhaps giving up the cookies to come talk about Planned Parenthood. It's always nice to be able to come in here after what felt like a pretty nice election too, in terms of support for the organization. So I'm happy to be here kind of in a happy place, right? In Minnesota, that's really great. So I was just gonna introduce myself to you all a little bit before we get started. I think the right goes forward. Cool. So my name is Vicki Van De Creek. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Senior Manager of Innovation at Planned Parenthood. I'm also the Regional Manager of Education. My background is Master's in Public Administration, Nonprofit Administration. And I started working in reproductive health as a door knocker or field canvasser for NARAL in 2011. So I've kind of seen the broad spectrum of how things have changed over the last 10 years. And I have to say it's pretty exciting although these challenges are unprecedented, it's kind of liberating to be talking really openly about the impact of reproductive health in our communities. So who we are, Planned Parenthood North States is a 5-state affiliate. So we actually serve Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Nebraska. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but knowing what we know about our border states, particularly in Rochester, we've become really kind of a safe haven for healthcare, particularly as we watch what's happening in Iowa. But we're one of approximately 53 Planned Parenthood affiliates in the Federation of America. We've been providing healthcare for more than 100 years, leading edge provider of personalized supportive sexual and reproductive healthcare services. It really is our imperative to be serving communities that get missed, communities that maybe don't have access to insurance, that maybe might not have access to transportation, to fill those gaps. Most of our patients are at or dramatically below federal poverty levels for the United States of America. We're one of the region's oldest and largest organized provider of sexual and reproductive health care services, and we're one of the largest providers of family planning services in the Midwest region. We're also the only acknowledged abortion provider in South Dakota, which is kind of scary. Yes, the outlook in South Dakota in terms of healthcare access is bleak. There's no other way to really put it. We are fortunate enough to be rolling out a lot of education services in South Dakota due to a multi-year funding grant, which is really exciting. We'll be able to go into community and provide at least education to equip people to access services, but our ability to provide healthcare services is decreasing in that state. So we're seeing a lot of people driving in to Minnesota. Thank you for asking that question. So, I'm gonna move on here. This is a map of our affiliate and our clinic locations for folks who are wondering kind of like what the impact is, particularly on when we look at the western border, there's very little resources. Another affiliate in Colorado does fill in some gaps for some of the western parts of our affiliate, but really looking at the map, Rochester and Mankato in southern Minnesota have become kind of safe havens from our neighboring communities as they come in to access services. Yep. Yeah, a lot of people driving in from Wisconsin as well. Montana is kind of an interesting state in terms of reproductive health care access. So in Montana, there's, we could say it's like a very conservative state in terms of politics. Oh, to ban abortion in Montana? No. To protect it? Okay. You're actually ahead of me on that one. I've been delightfully avoiding the news since the election in a decompression frame of mind. I'm not going to lie. But that's the odd thing about Montana is a lot of their politics are particularly conservative. But in terms of individuality and like constitutionalism, they really lean into reproductive health rights and abortion access. So I do foresee, like Fargo-Moorhead being kind of a safe stop area for North Dakota, but a lot of people are going to be heading into Montana, Colorado as those safe havens. And that's going to be really important too when we look at like what's happening in Idaho, getting really conservative. And thanks for sharing your knowledge with me too. I appreciate it. So when we think about Planned Parenthood North Central States, we always describe it as a three-legged stool in the work that we do in communities. So the way that we show up for people in community is providing healthcare services, advocacy, which is our public affairs arm of the movement, so a lot of the mobilization of resources, human and otherwise, around basically things to do with political action, and then our education department, which is going into community, and it's kind of the lesser known, or our best kept secret perhaps of the organization, is the work that we're doing with young people, professionals, and adult education within our communities to help empower people and really position them to be making choices that feel best for them, whether that's in terms of managing their own sexual and reproductive health or expression. So we'll kind of work through these one at a time. For healthcare, this is just a snapshot of the services that we offer to patients in the region. So PEP and PrEP for HIV prevention, cancer screenings, that's pap smears, breast exams, colposcopies, LEEPs, mammograms. We do referrals to our St. Paul location as a surgical site if there needs to be a surgical intervention. We screen for depression and anxiety, provide abortion care, HPV and Hep B vaccines, testing and treatment for UTIs, bladder infections, vaginal infections, pregnancy testing, options counseling, fertility awareness, education, routine physicals, miscarriage management, transgender hormone therapy, birth control. I'm going to pull up our telehealth services in a minute here, but we're also starting to offer smoking cessation for folks impacted, and the depression and anxiety screening and treatment via telehealth. What we've found is that a lot of times for the patients that we serve, we're the only healthcare that people will access, like throughout the year. Yeah, so being able to incorporate a few other services that help to increase people's overall health has been really important. Yeah.
You don't have physicians, you refer, you screen people and route them to physicians, or do you have physicians within Planned Parenthood?
For depression and anxiety treatment?
For birth control, ordering birth control, or abortion.
Yeah, so in Planned Parenthood, we have providers, we have nurse practitioners as clinicians, nurses, and then our HCA staff. So full spectrum of services. In Minnesota, after the fall of Roe, a law was passed that allowed clinicians to be performing most services in the state of Minnesota. So our nurse practitioners are now able to provide abortion care as well in the state of Minnesota. Yeah, Planned Parenthood is available for anybody who seeks care. So we do have a lot of male identifying patients who will come in for routine STI screening. There's people who might come in for screenings for things like testicular cancer as well. Breast cancer. So really, I think we like to say we offer services to people of all genders, particularly when we think about things like transgender hormone therapy as well. The depression, anxiety screening, smoking cessation would be relevant for anybody accessing services. Thanks for asking that question. That comes up a lot. I think sometimes people think that Planned Parenthood is only for maybe like female identifying folks, but really the services are available to anybody who needs them. So recently, during the pandemic, we were really able to beef up our telemedicine programming in Planned Parenthood North Central States. So most of the services that we offer, we can provide to people where they're at. I say where they're at and as opposed to like in their home, because many of the people that we serve maybe might not have a home, right? So working to partner with shelters to meet people where they're at in terms of care. So we're actually able to distribute or mail STI testing kits, so people can swab, collect urine, and then mail it in. We can result it and then mail out medications for treatment. We're also able to mail out gender-affirming hormone therapy kits after education and continued follow-up, so people can administer in the privacy of their own home. If we think about that map before of our 5-state affiliate and the areas that have no access to in-person clinic services, particularly when we think about the communities we serve who are under-resourced, might not have cars, might not be able to take time off of work, might not be able to travel 5 hours to go across the state. This is really groundbreaking to be able to send this out to people where they're at. So, really neat. I know you asked about male health care. We do have vasectomy consults that can be done via telemedicine. Obviously, that procedure happens in person. At our Vandalia clinic is our surgical site. That is not a home health kit. No, we cannot mail that out. But really, this is so exciting, the way that we're beefing up this programming. And when I think about the future of healthcare equity specifically, right, being able to fill these really important gaps, I think telehealth is a tool, right? But there's obvious barriers because we think about people having access to device, internet, technology. So one of the big questions that we're asking ourselves now as an organization is how do we partner to meet people who don't have those resources to be able to continue to offer these services in our more rural communities specifically? So one of the things that we're thinking about now is how do we partner with community to have pop-up telehealth services available to people where they can come in, have a computer, a private space. For people who may not have a location or an address, what does it look like to potentially have STI kits there where people can take them, community can help mail those back in, and potentially distribute meds once they're mailed to the patient. So a lot to think about. And that's one of the exciting things about like being here talking to you all is I think when we connect with community and talk about like how do we reach our most vulnerable populations, there's a lot of really cool ideas that can pop up and be shared. So the next thing we're going to talk about is our education services. So at Planned Parenthood North Central States, we offer single session education programming and multi-session education programming. So we'll go into schools and help with health education courses. We offer a full spectrum of education services ranging from, you know, we think of most when we think of sex education, right? Like our anatomy, our physiology, our safer sex. But we also have a full range of education topics addressing the psychosocial elements of human sexuality. So thinking about healthy relationships, themes of consent. How do we end cycles of abuse? What does it look like to empower young people with ideas of radical self-love? For myself personally in my education philosophy, I think there's more to sexual and reproductive health education than just handing out condoms to kids, right? We've seen scientifically that when we do that, that doesn't actually address rates of unintended pregnancy and STIs. What addresses those rates is doing the psychosocial lessons that help to increase feelings of self-efficacy for our youth and empower them to have conversations about maybe using condoms or whether or not they're even ready to have sexual relationships. Those are the tougher skills to build, but that's really kind of like what we're after at this point when we think about progressive and important education. So another big thing that we do in our education programming is we run peer education programs that are designed to create like ripple effects in our communities. So those are generally 24 hours of education that's delivered over, we've done summer camps, we've done a summer camp here actually before, that's delivered over the course of like 4 or 5 days, or delivered over the course of like 8 to 12 weeks, where people meet, learn new topics, get to know each other. But the kind of like the fun part is they're encouraged to go out and have peer contacts. We know that young people actually have these conversations all the time with their friends, right? We equip them with accurate information to go out and continue to have these conversations. We collect that data and then kind of create like this measurable community impact. So if we have a group of 10 youth that participate in a peer education program. At the end of the peer education program, they've gone out and reached 300 people and had these conversations. We also offer adult programming. We call lay health educator programming. A lot of it's culturally specific. So here in Rochester, we work a lot with the East African immigrant community and the Pajoma Women's Group, empowering them to go into their own community and have these conversations in culturally competent ways. One of the biggest pieces of feedback we've had from that partnership was hearing from people that like in their culture, they weren't able to have these conversations about periods and puberty, and that many of these women and these mothers felt so empowered to be able to have these conversations with their kids when they reach puberty. And that just stuck out to me as such an important piece of information, right? So that's kind of an idea of the work that we're doing. In the Mankato area, we're doing a lot of Entre Amigas programming, which is culturally specific program for Latina communities, working with lay health educator programs. In Rochester, we also run a teen council. I don't know if any of you have heard of teen council before. It's been around for about 20 years in Rochester. We have a group of high school students who join us for the entire academic year. They learn about basically all issues related to being a teenager, sexual and reproductive health, and they actually learn some lessons, and they go into schools and teach. What we found through research is that young people learn better from young people. You know, as cool as I like to think I am, turns out I'm not. Do they get credit? So for Teen Council, they do not get any kind of academic credit. We do run a Reach One, Teach One program in partnership with the Rochester Alternative Learning Center. That's taught as a class over the course of a quarter, and those kids will get either a health or elective credit for completing it. So when it's possible to partner for enhancing academic opportunities for the kids, we try to make it possible. ALC is really great. We've actually been able to do roto programming at Gage Transitional Housing, and for the youth who were also enrolled in ALC, they were able to get a credit for that too. Yeah, they're one of the best partners in our community. But for the kids in Teen Council, those are generally like our front of the class kids is kind of how I think about them. So it's usually a big step for like a college application too, is how those kids use it. Any questions about some of the education programming that we offer?
And I wish, you know, this is great. You know, like I didn't think about the education and the advocacy so much, even for myself, about Planned Parenthood. To know that there's more than because everybody, all they think of is abortion, but it's like there's a broad, really a broad spectrum of what Planned Parenthood brings to people who have no access.
Yeah, certainly. And particularly in Rochester and Mankato, we have 5 full-time educators working year-round. And most of our programming is funded through the Minnesota Department of Health Family Planning Special Projects budget. So the state invests in us, right? Because we make a big impact in community. We pre and post survey most of our program participants too. And you know, throughout the last 15 years, we've documented not only increases in knowledge about like human anatomy, healthy relationships, but like I was talking about that self-efficacy, gauging how people perceive their ability to make choices. And that continues to just increase over time. And for me, that's the sweet spot, right? Like putting people into a position where they feel very comfortable finding resources and making choices about their future, right?
How much help do you get from like Mayo Clinic in Olmsted County? I think about this med city aspect, and it's like, do these bigger things actually partner?
Yeah, you know, pre-pandemic, we did have some coalition work that was happening where we were all kind of getting together and talking about how we intersect in the services that we're offering. The pandemic really kind of threw a big wrench in the situation because most of our public health partners had to pivot into epidemiology. So I'm hoping to get that going again. But we are working this year with a group of Mayo Med students to pilot our first peer education program that's also in partnership with the Landing Day Shelter. So this group of med students are going to become living resources. So we're equipping them with like trauma-informed perspectives on having conversations about human sexuality. And this is based off of focus groups that we've done at the Landing to try and make sure that the community is dictating the information that they want. But they'll be there to answer questions, distribute resources, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And just think what they're learning and that they'll be able to pass on as they become physicians. That's amazing.
Yeah. We actually had our first session yesterday, and one of the big themes that we talked about was ending cycles of abuse, but leaning into sex positivity and how we frame conversations, and questions and conversations with guests of the Landing in non-judgmental and affirming ways to make sure that people feel good about accessing care. Because that's one of the big things that came up at the Landing when we did our focus groups, is many people experiencing houselessness in the Rochester area don't feel comfortable going into clinics. They don't feel comfortable getting enrolled in health insurance because big questions are gonna be, what's your address? Right, how do we get you enrolled? And they're like, I'm never gonna be able to pay a copay. Right, so we're kind of figuring out how do we bring resources into the shelter, knowing that even though it's half a mile down the road, people aren't gonna go. So filling gaps is really our vision. And even when we can combine education with healthcare, for example, like this med student program, that's kind of like the sweet spot, right? So the third leg of the stool I was gonna talk about is our advocacy programming. So electoral, policy, and building power. So I'm sure many of you may have had somebody from Planned Parenthood contact you prior to the election, maybe via phone call or text messaging, but a fair amount of phone banking, that kind of advocacy and mobilization around elections. You'll also hear from them a lot when bills are going to be coming up, any kind of legislation, they're going to be reaching out. They're also going to be coalition building in the community, so combining forces in whatever way that they can to build power in advocating for sexual and reproductive health rights in the state of Minnesota. A lot of door knocking. There was a lot of canvassing this year too. So we operate in Minnesota. We have a 501c3 and a 501c4 arm of our political action fund. So our 501c3 is our nonprofit work. So limited lobbying, no candidate endorsement, no political contributions. If people were to donate, that's tax deductible. And then we have our 501c4. And that's the political action fund. So that one makes political contribution, endorses candidates, and does lobbying at the Capitol. So these are kind of like two separate entities under one roof in our organization just because of tax purposes. That's a lot of information, but basically we can't use like a lot of public or federal or state funding to fund political work, right? It has to be more of the general like get out the vote work, I guess would qualify as 501c3. Vote for this candidate because they support the organization would be 501c4.
So that's not tax deductible if you donate to the 501c4, is that correct?
Yep, the political action arm will not be a tax deductible donation. I always like to throw out the difference for people because I know we're going to be talking about ways to get involved, and I wouldn't be working for a nonprofit if I didn't say you could donate. So a couple things to keep in mind there. Oh, do you want me to go back? Yep. Yeah, so they're technically separate entities within our organization. So, or two organizations under one roof is maybe another way to think about it. Our public affairs staff who do C4 work bill entirely separate hours. Yeah, so even down to like timekeeping and accounting. It's a completely separate organization. That's all one organization. Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. So our strategic vision, this is from fiscal year 21 to 23. Our 4 main areas of focus at Planned Parenthood are care. So growing the number of patients we care for, increasing patient access, protecting access, and expanding our services. The other part is community, so increasing brand awareness and strength, engaging with people, particularly younger people. What we found that's kind of surprising in our data is not as many young people are utilizing our services. Yeah, we're seeing more like 20 to 35-year-olds are primary service users.
I like Planned Parenthood because I could never approach my parents and say, I would like to get birth control.
It's a very common story.
So
Yep.
the younger people maybe aren't able to approach their parents and say, this is what I want.
Yeah, they might be having those conversations. They also just might not be having access to care.
That's true.
Is the other part of it, especially as we come out of the pandemic. I'm interested to see where the public health data is going to lie on some of that. The additional part is capacity. So leverage, power, influence, expanding our digital scope. It also means empowering community members to do some of this work on their own or in partnership, like we talked about, working with partners to be able to offer things like telehealth services in communities that might not have access otherwise is a piece of capacity building, because it's expanding the work that can be done without physical presence. And then culture, increasing equity and engagement of our employees, and ensuring inclusive and diverse employees has been a really important part of our organizational mission in the last 2 years, and will continue to be through fiscal year 23. So, how to help? Like I said, I would not be working for a nonprofit if I did not talk about the ability to donate to our organization. When it comes down to it, we're always going to need funds. We're always going to be under-resourced, and we're always going to be potentially waiting for the next shoe to drop, if you will, right? Especially now. If we think about a couple years ago when we lost Title X funding, that recently just came back in a few of our states, but that was a huge blow. Title X funding generally funds our ability to cover the most vulnerable of our populations, because it allows us to not enroll people in health insurance and to just be able to subsidize healthcare. So when that goes away, that's dangerous for our patients, ultimately. So funds are always important. The second way to help is to activate. And I have a few ideas about that. But we also have an activity to help you all maybe like map out and brainstorm some ways that you can get involved as well. So in terms of activate, few ideas I have for you. I mean, voting, always, right? We saw that in the last election, how powerful that is. Volunteering at Planned Parenthood, coming to our events. Kylie Fa, I don't know if anybody's ever interacted with her in the community, is gonna be hosting a lot more kind of like education sessions or activity sessions. So I encourage people to get involved, meet other like-minded individuals within our community. Sharing information and having conversations is a really big one that I think sometimes gets overlooked. Talking to the people that you move in space with about the reality of like what Planned Parenthood does. Did you know about these education services? Helping people to broaden their perspectives and understand more about the organization is important, and that is activism. And helping to end abortion stigma. That's a big one. If we have a little time at the end, I can go into it. But helping to really tell the story of how important this healthcare service is to people and saving lives ultimately sometimes. But stepping up, having those conversations is one of the big ways that we're gonna change things in the future. So I have an activity for you all to brainstorm. Amy's gonna help me hand out some Post-it notes and a pen. You can keep your pen if you want at the end of the activity. But I'd like everybody to take 3 Post-it notes and write down 3 ideas of how you could support Planned Parenthood. So think big. You might come up with something I've never even considered before. That would be really cool. But I'd love you to map those out. And then we have this board over here. When you're done, just go ahead and stick them on here, and then we can kind of reflectively look at those and see what you all have for a vision of community impact. I also have some brochures over here too about Planned Parenthood if you wanted to take one. But really, I want to inspire folks to be thinking, like, realistically, what's 3 things that I could do? So fill out your 3 Post-it notes. My disclaimer I have here, this was a big one. We had a lot of people reaching out to this summer, offering to drive or house patients, especially patients needing to go across state lines. Right now, we don't have the capacity to support that for Planned Parenthood. There's just a lot of insurance and liability for us transporting patients. But there are organizations who are already doing that work and have already been talking about and planning how to do it. So if you all wanted to get connected with them, I would be happy to give you some resources too. But that's one. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Yeah, cross it out, add another one. But yeah, I'd love to see what you all come up with. I think sometimes that idea of like, even like activating our brain and having to write it out can help us take one more step forward in terms of like action. Yeah, in our community. Yeah, thank you for asking that. So we have a couple ways that people can get involved in the local community. So we do have a small group of clinic escorts that work on Monday mornings. They have 1-hour shifts where they stand outside, keep an eye on the protesters to make sure that they're not getting into too much trouble. Then keep an eye on patients to make sure that they kind of like safely make it to and from the clinic from their vehicles. Here in Rochester, we're kind of lucky that the sidewalk is so far from the clinic with that big parking lot.
So you're still at Northgate?
Northgate, yep, we're still right there. So usually the protesters stay on the sidewalk, and it's a pretty, yeah. I started the escort program here after the protesters had started to sneak into the parking lot. And what we found is that just having people watching them, like, it's very Minnesotan. They're like, ooh, never mind. I'll stay over on the sidewalk, I'm fine. So just having that presence has been really helpful. We have a small group that's been really committed. We've had pretty much the same volunteer group for the last 3.5 years. But we do have a few openings. We've been toying around with expanding it. So if anybody's interested in that, I can take your information from you. We also have programs that we call like super activists. So they'll get together and do things like pre-election, like some of the phone banking or text banking. They'll also do letter writing campaigns when we have big pieces of legislation coming up. They will come in. Kylie, this is perfect timing. Yeah. That's okay. We're just talking about super activists and some of the ways to volunteer in Rochester. Oh, that's okay. So everybody, this is Kylie. I was talking about Kylie before. She works with a lot of volunteers in our organization. Not to put you on the spot, but would you like to talk about your volunteer programming?
First off, I'm so sorry I'm late. I really thought this was happening at noon. So what time did it start? 11?
It's okay.
Oh my goodness. Hi, my name is Kylie. I'm a community organizer here with Planned Parenthood Action Fund, and I work with like the clinic occasionally. I do a lot of political organizing, electoral organizing, and so I work a lot with like volunteers. We do things like door knocking, calling senators, legislators, phone banking, and so election season just ended, obviously, and so I did a lot of work since probably February to kind of engage with voters, encouraging them to go vote, people who haven't usually gone vote, or kind of talking to swing voters, kind of educating them about like what's on the ballot this year. And so a lot of really big things happen. We had a lot of volunteers and a lot of mobilization here in Rochester because it's one of the key areas for our races. And so we made history. So we have a full pro-choice, like Senate, House, and Governor's office. And so our next steps, and like the only reason why this happened is because like volunteers and kind of really educating folks about like what's on the line. And so our next move is to kind of implement what is called the PRO Act, which is like protection of reproductive health care, finding ways to include and implement family planning, which includes like birth control that's covered in insurance policies, IUDs, et cetera. And so that's kind of the next step as we move into what is called legislative session, where bills are kind of put into office and passed to become laws and everything. And so that's what we'll be doing next after we take a small break, because we've been working a lot since February. And so I just had like a 3-day break, and it was really nice. But the work doesn't end just because we have like a pro-choice House and Senate anymore. And so we still have to educate people, tell them to talk to their legislators, people who represent them in their area, because your voice matters and your voice is, important. And so that's kind of the recent work I've been doing. But I also do, since I do work with volunteers, like we try to encourage like educational events. And so like working with churches as well to kind of have these kind of discussions, whether it involves like electoral work and educating folks about the importance of voting, or whether it implements like youth and teaching them about like healthy relationships and everything. And so one of my like plans, I want to teach people about health policy, because we have a lot of students here in Rochester that want to become health providers. And so kind of teaching them like how policy affects their work as future healthcare providers. And so we do a lot of other educational work, but we also do a lot of community organizing, community building, and that looks like stuff like period equity drives. We recently put together like care baskets for abortion patients and everything. And so we also do like that uplifting work for our patients in our community as well. So yeah, that's what I do.
Cool. So everybody was just completing an activity. They all got 3 Post-it notes and filled out ideas of ways that they can get involved in Rochester. And then when everybody's ready, we're gonna have them put it on the board. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think in terms of like formal information, that's about all I've got for you for today. Yeah, it's about 12, so we won't have to go into abortion stigma. But thanks everybody who made time to be here. I really appreciate it. And if you want to hang out, have questions, talk one-on-one, I'm more than happy to be here.